Welcome to Drugs Unwrapped, the podcast, brought to you by Barod. Barod is a substance use service based across West, South and East Wales. Each episode will be asking one question about drugs and their use and debating it from the perspectives of those at the front line, providing support and services to those affected by substances. Hello, welcome to Drugs Unwrapped with me, Rob. Today's episode is going to be one of the features that we're going to bring every now and again, which is chatting to people that have lived experience of substance use, from alcohol, cannabis to heroin and crack cocaine. So today I'm delighted to be joined by Steve. Steve, how are we? You okay?
Yeah, all good. Thanks, Rob. Yeah.
Good. So yeah, thank you for joining us. Obviously we've known each other for quite a few years now, isn't it? And I've never actually sat down with you and had the opportunity really to talk about kind of like your experiences in terms of prior to working for Barod. Are you able to just give us a very quick overview in terms of the history around your substance use and ultimately where you are at like today?
So like many probably, I started drinking around the age of 14, weekends, a few cans of cider with friends. That kind of escalated as I went through by my late teens and into my 20s. Then I was drinking every day. It became a thing to do after work. A lot of ecstasy in my early 20s, and then following that, cocaine. That was a very regular thing sort of for the next, say, 15 years or so. And then 5 years ago I came through the doors downstairs as a service user looking for some help, and Barod provided that. Engaged for the next, 2 years up until COVID. And then started applying for jobs, and in September it will be 3 years since I started at DDAS in Carmarthenshire. And
how's that going?
Really well. Yeah, it's fascinating work, it really is, and good team out there.
So what's it like being on the other side of it now? Like what's the kind of experience you've had since working?
I think there's quite a bit of imposter syndrome at times. Certainly when you first start, it's kind of like, should I be here? Certainly it just feels like you jumped the bar. Okay. But yeah, it's in terms of my own recovery, there's constant reminders of where this can go, you know. So it's productive in terms of my own recovery, but it's also I don't know, it's provided me with a purpose that I've never really felt in the past.
Okay.
So yeah, it's a job. Probably my most fulfilling job I've had. Definitely.
Do you mean purpose in terms of like what do you mean by purpose then?
I feel like I'm contributing.
Okay.
I think certainly as my sort of alcohol use and drug use took hold, there'd be periods where I'd function quite well in jobs, and then a sort of spiral of decline. Usually I'd withdraw. Several times there were like suicide attempts, and then pick yourself up, start again, and kind of career progression was kind of in the wrong direction, as it were. So like I started off doing bookkeeping, accountancy, ended up 10 years labouring cash in hand on buildings, sites and everything like that. But yeah, with this job I feel I'm contributing. I feel I'm making a difference. You know, it's something that it does. It gives me purpose in that respect. I feel there's a reason for me getting up in the morning, you know, which is really important for part of my recovery.
Yeah, definitely. And before we kind of go into obviously your kind of experience around substance use, kind of keeping on the theme in terms of your current kind of job, what's it like in terms of supporting people who have kind of been in a similar or in a similar situation to maybe what you found yourself in? Is it tricky to kind of hear those stories? Tricky as in kind of in terms of the own emotions and feelings that kind of may come back to the surface for you, or kind of or tricky in respect to, you know, the person in front of you actually, you know, is going through what you know as a potentially tough time? Like what's it like to kind of hear those stories?
It's some things can be very emotive, you know, and so it is being mindful and knowing that the support's around you if there is anything that's too close to home. But it is those constant reminders as well that stop me certainly getting complacent in my own recovery. I think I also I wouldn't say feel great pressure, but I take it very seriously that I might be that person, the one person that person gets to talk to. So there is a real sense of duty or struggling for the word here, but there is a real responsibility that person gets, because I know how transformative this whole process can be. You know, so really willing for the people to make the changes. And like being mindful, it is just that reminder as well, because you're surrounded by the consequences and where it can take you, because it's easy to forget, you know, exactly how dark a place you ended up in. And so for me personally, those reminders, they stop me getting complacent about my own recovery. And I hope I do take the responsibility of what we do very seriously, you know, because we are potentially, a lot of people will come in and out of service. Some people, if they have that bad experience first, then that might be close to them for quite some time. So my central to what I do is make that person want to come back in again. Yeah.
And kind of drawing on your own experience, how does that work? Like, what is it that kept you coming back in terms of support?
I don't know. I think the only time I actually engaged with a drug and alcohol service, I found everything I needed, fortunately, sort of at Barrowd, and I was engaging with Swansea Mind at the same time. But there's always a warm welcome. You could feel a nice sort of sense of community with the service users as well, and everything. But for me, it's personal, being personable, you know, people's names, a smiley, a warm welcome, even if they're just coming in for a needle exchange transaction or something. Let's get people comfortable coming into the building, because that's a massive step for people. I know myself, just coming through that door is a really, really big thing for people to do, and it may be that person's been trying to do that for weeks and never managed it. So when they come through, it is, you know, just give that listening ear, make sure they've got your full attention.
Going back in terms of, like you said, accessing services for the first time, like for you, what was that like in terms of like going through that door for the very first time? Like, because a lot of people say it's like the hardest step. Is that something that you relate to, or what was your experience of going through that door for the very first time?
I think, the hardest step is kind of, like you say, owning up, saying I can't do this on my own. I had a GP, she was really understanding, like, and she was the first GP perhaps who, because I kind of went for my mental health, that was kind of how I wrapped everything up, and she was the first GP that I spoke to who could kind of acknowledge that maybe there was mental health issues, not just because I was drinking or using drugs. So actually acknowledge that maybe there's something as well as the drinking and drugs. I'd always been made to feel that the alcohol and the drugs were the reason I felt the way I did. That's how I'd felt with previous GPs. And so she suggested, you know, it's going to help your mental health and help you sort that out if you can have like a period of abstinence or certainly reduced use. And so, I called ADAS up the road. Dad dropped me off to be assessed by them, and then they sort of signposted me to Smart down here. And I came in, and it was about 3 hours before the meeting, so I went home that day. But I do remember coming back. Yeah, that's it. Yes, rather than hanging about in town, which 3 hours in Swansea city centre wouldn't have gone well for me, but at that stage. So, went home, and I think the next one was 2 days later, and it was just the anticipation, the anxiety growing, and everything, and then you're welcomed in. You're not going to say anything, but that's the great thing. I love the mutual aid setting, just because you've got people various stages, people more au fait with the setting and everything, and you can kind of ease your way into seeing what it's all about. With me, I think perhaps a certain amount of denial helped. I was coming to a drug and alcohol service, but it was for the sake of my mental health, so I was kind of able to kind of put that to one side, you know. And I was probably 6 months sort of abstinent by the time that I was able to actually say, do you know what, the drinking and drugs have been a massive problem for you for a long time.
It took 6 months.
Probably so, yeah, for me to actually say that. And I was typing something at the time. I'd been asked to do a speech. I was shadowing the national coordinator for SMART at the time, and I'd been asked to just share a little bit at the rehab in Brunel. So I'd sat down at the computer, and over 6 weeks, just my whole life story sort of spilled out of me, and I typed the words really before I thought them, that my main reason for getting out of bed since about the age of 20 was to have a drink.
Okay.
And that was the moment that it clicked to me that, okay, there was mental health, I know that there were certain things there, but the alcohol and the drugs, they really became their own issue. And they were probably the bigger contributor to struggles with life, probably just because the social impact that those have, you know, work and everything, and of course the impact that they had on my mental health as well. They exacerbated any issues that were there already.
Sure.
Yeah.
So it's worth noting that you're actually an author as well.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. That's cool.
Yeah.
Yes, and then what's the book called?
The Day I Chose to Live.
The Day I Chose to Live. So available from any good bookstore. Nowhere specific.
No.
So mental health was an issue for you initially. Then was it? Do you see the mental health kind of being something that preceded substance use?
Yeah, very much so. Having an understanding of anxiety now, I can look back and say that I was suffering from anxiety from a very young age. That kind of manifested itself at times that the fear of failure would outweigh the will to succeed, and so certain opportunities I would allow to pass me by. Wouldn't engage in certain things. I had strong suicidal ideation and impulse from, say, the age of 10 or 11, which is where, when I've had medical professionals kind of putting it all on to the substance use, it's like this was going on beforehand. And I think then I didn't seek out anything to help with it, but I found that alcohol, that allowed this to subside. It allowed me to be a bit more at home in sort of social settings, or, you know, as you're grown up and everything. And it kind of spiraled from there, really, to the point that I kind of maximised my time drinking as much as possible as I grew into adulthood, and never really learnt to socialise without the use of alcohol or something else, really.
Okay. So it was definitely kind of something that kind of helped you from that kind of socialise and kind of perspective then. So you say in terms of like you had like suicidal kind of ideation from a really young age, like reflecting back, is it just something that you kind of acknowledged that just kind of happened in terms of those feelings and thoughts, or was there something going on at that time which kind of led to you to ultimately experiencing kind of like suicide ideation?
With me, there was no great trauma. What would be looked on idyllic childhood, you know, loving mother and father, pretty decent school life. I lacked confidence, and I think I had serious self-esteem issues and all that. I was a skinny boy, so I think growing up like that, you know, is that just allows you, I don't know, but it brings in feelings of like low self-esteem and everything. And I never ever felt like I fitted in anywhere. I think that was the problem. Okay. And so in that respect, you start behaving, or you start kind of trying to be someone that you're not authentically, and that brings with it its own internal conflicts.
Yeah.
You know, and then you find, like I said, the alcohol and that, and as an early teenager I could get access to alcohol as well, so that brought me a bit of kudos in certain circles. Okay. And so you kind of go, oh, hang about, this is getting me noticed, or like some attention, so you kind of push on with what you feel you're good at, or what's doing that, because it gets you perhaps what you want. A sense of belonging was perhaps what I was looking for at that point. And when you're young, it's like, say, mucking about a few cans of cider and all that. It's pretty innocent. And then But my schoolwork, I was a bright pupil, but school didn't engage me. So I kind of breezed through my GCSEs, and then when it came to time to A levels and time to sort of knuckle down, I didn't really have the motivation and that. So I didn't do well in my A levels. Got a place in clearing, deferred a year, worked for that year. That gave me the means to be drinking 7 nights a week.
Okay.
So then by the time I came to university, I was still living in Bromley then, I came to Swansea Physics Foundation course. I was in that role of drinking as much as I possibly could. So
okay.
I did a term, went home for Christmas and didn't come back, so I cut my losses.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then went back to work, and again, that provides you with a means to continue doing what you want and to continue like that. And you can sustain it at a young age for a certain period. But yeah, the toll on my mental health, I was doing some temp work for the local council up there, and drinking escalated. So left that job, started working there with my father's bookkeeping accountancy business. And yeah, just the drinking really, really escalated. Then you're talking probably 12, 15 pints every night, all day drinking at the weekend. And coming up to Christmas, well, it was actually early Christmas morning that I had my first suicide attempt that year, then at the age of 20. Which, yeah, you could just see everything escalating. The drinking, my mental health was deteriorating massively at the same time. You know, there's no doubt that they go hand in hand. And that was the first one, yeah, like I say, just at the age of 20 I would have been then. Just went home after drinking all night on Christmas Eve. Sent out a suicide note on group text sort of on my Nokia and cut my wrists. Got back and that was kind of over the next 15 years or so, that would kind of be symptomatic of a cycle I get into. I'd get back up, I'd sort of dust myself off, carry on working for my father for another 5 years it was, till they moved down to Wales. And so there was work there. But yeah, things would be better for a period. My drinking would continue, it did then start to, as my mental health went down, drinking would go up. Often then a period of withdrawal, so just withdrawing from life, taking to my bedroom, and then whether another suicide attempt, there was only one more then, or yeah, just getting back into it somehow, you know. Nothing was ever really addressed, and that was me. I never could, you know, never asked for help. Again, it was that denial. I certainly wasn't going to deny that I had an issue with alcohol. Didn't want to deny that I had an issue with mental health. I just pictured myself as an incredibly weak individual.
Okay.
And that was a big part of sort of my life up until I came into recovery, was just my self-image of someone who, because there was nothing wrong with my life, there were no major issues or anything, but I just found I couldn't cope with things, and I just saw that as some personal defect.
What do you think now, like reflecting back, when you say, you know, the time you thought you were a weak individual, like what do you think about that now in terms of having those beliefs?
It's I still don't have a great deal of empathy for myself. It's strange.
Okay.
I still kind of think, and I don't really regret or anything, because that's happened and it's brought me to where I am, and I'm just in a wonderful place in life now. But if someone was sat across from me in session, you know, I'd be telling them, just, you're dealing with those thoughts every single day and you're continuing, you know, you're an incredibly strong individual. It's still sometimes difficult to see that in myself, because I say there was no great upheaval in my life. It kind of had it all, and yet I still struggled. But yeah, being a bit more compassionate towards myself, it's to actually continue on when you are experiencing those thoughts. And it was depression or anxiety or both most of the time, you know. It got to a point where if I had something nice planned, that was then, by the time it got to that, I was already focusing on, you know, you've got that one thing you're looking forward to, you kind of crawling towards it, you know. By the time it came to it, you're already focusing on, well, this is going to be over soon. Okay. So you don't even get to enjoy the actual occasion or anything like that. Yeah. And yeah, you just get into really negative sort of mindset and everything. And I think I slipped probably late teens, early 20s. I slipped into a way of thinking, right, a day's work. If I do a day's work, that's justification. I'm going to have a drink.
Okay, right, yeah.
But if it's a bad day, then I'm going to have a skinful.
Okay.
So all of a sudden, you're conditioning yourself to start looking for something bad in that day. It's something I can see looking back now that I was doing. So yeah, you're almost waking up in the morning looking for something bad to happen, and you'll find it. And there might be nothing that goes wrong, but you'll find something to justify what you then go and do later. Yeah. And that was the big battle for me then, was turning that round really. It's the mindset, yeah.
So what? I know we're kind of jumping.
Yeah, sorry.
But like, how do you change that mindset? Like, if you got somebody in a similar position who maybe is still having those beliefs, those kind of irrational beliefs, negative beliefs around themselves, like how do you go about changing that, and what kind of worked for you really in terms of changing those thoughts?
It's difficult because you do get asked this, and it happened over time. I'm not even necessarily sure that I'm happening. Smart recovery was the biggest influence on me. I was coming to Smart here 2-3 times a week, also attending anxiety and depression groups at Mind, and that's where the mutual aid setting really comes into its own, because you can gain insight from someone else. You know, it's not as if someone's telling you this is the way it is or anything. You kind of, and you're offering, you're always going to be more compassionate to someone else rather than yourself, and so all of a sudden you're having to think about your thought patterns, but not necessarily your thought patterns, because it's almost being like a surrogate almost. Somebody else is going through similar. You can dispute it with them. You can't dispute it with yourself. You just find it too difficult. But in that, and I think it happens over time. I mean, self-talk that's the biggest thing. Like my self-talk's changed over the years in the fact, give yourself a break a little bit. That acceptance, you are human. Yeah. But give yourself a break. And it is kind of like, it is openly disputing with yourself, and that does take practice. You know, and then again, whereas I condition myself to look for the bad in every day, just look for the good. Again, that takes time.
Sure. But
it's start to appreciate, and I think with the sobriety and everything, that helped. I think because it was a sort of clean sweep for me. Okay. And it was being at Barrod, doing Smart Recovery, and being with Swansea Mind. The focus was much more on the positive and everything. So you do slowly start to, and if you've got all of the benefits that come, certainly for me, with stopping drinking, taking drugs, you know, better mental health, better physical health, you know, just certain things like with my parents, you know, you could see that they were less, not tightly wound, but slowly becoming less concerned about me, because they'd had a rougher time with it. And you just, it slowly becomes noticing the benefits. I was one of those people who said I don't get hangovers. You know, I'd have a dozen pints and I'd be up. I thought fresh as a daisy, go and work on a building site all day. A month after drinking, you realise, hang about, this is how I'm supposed to feel in the morning. Okay. Yeah, not 70% of this. Just because I woke up feeling like that every single morning, you just feel, I don't get a hangover, but you just realise you were running on fumes a lot of the time.
So you were having hangovers, it was something you experienced every day?
Absolutely, okay. It became the default, yeah. But you just think to yourself, I don't get hangovers, and because you can push on and function. It's, but it was just, that was my default, my baseline was hungover.
Yeah. You mentioned your parents. What was that like in terms of when you did you sit down with them, like to kind of talk to them about what was going on for you at the time? Like, did you have that conversation, or did they find out some other means? Like, regardless of the answer to that question, what was that kind of experience like in terms of for your parents when they realised that you had stuff going on in relation to not just your alcohol use but also in terms of your mental health?
They knew long before me, I think. As far as the alcohol concerned, neither of them ever drank much. Mum maybe a glass of sherry cooking Sunday lunch. Dad hardly ever touched alcohol. And so the whole drinking, and my brother drank heavily as well, but the whole sort of thing about going out and doing that was something they didn't really know, or it wasn't, they'd seen so much, it wasn't a world that they moved in, as it were. And so they could see, obviously, it was a big anathema to them from sort of me doing that sort of, say, late teens every day. And they were around, obviously, like, lived with them till was 25. They then moved down to Swansea to bring a couple of elderly relatives down, and the idea was to spend their last years, because they were from Clydach originally. Within a year I'd followed them down, just because my life had completely disintegrated up there. I was with them for a few years, and then my brother and I had a few places around Swansea, and we were into the same sort of things then, but I'd be back and forward. I'd always be back and forward. I then had 2 years back up in London, again trying to piece together bits and pieces. A period where I was doing quite well at work, earning quite well, gave me the means then for that to escalate. That goes down, same thing happens, so then I moved back. So they'd been around it for a lot of what was going on. The suicide attempts that people knew about, they were aware of. Obviously the drinking, they were quite naive around the drugs, so that was concealed a lot, and that was like a lot of cocaine, but that was away from the house really, so that they weren't confronted with that. But I know that, and we've spoken about it over the last 5 years, and everything. I just know that, the constant state of concern and everything. I think that they obviously knew the consequences of the drinking and the drugs, but I think that their main concern was that one day I was going to be successful in the suicide attempt. Okay. I think that was the real thing. And it came to a head, like I say, this back in 2018. I was back living with them, and they went away for 2 weeks. Well, early in the year, I'd gone back to self-harm. Now, I self-harmed between the ages of about 17 and 25, when I'd cut my wrist for a second time and survived, and realised that wasn't going to be a way that I could kill myself, so I just stopped self-harming. And then at the age of 38, it came back in. Heavy drinking. I'd stopped the cocaine at that point. I think part of me was just looking for an oblivion that only alcohol would bring. The cocaine kind of kept me using that with drink a bit too level almost. And so the self-harm came in, and I remember spending one night up all night just kind of battling, do I cut or don't I cut? Not knowing which side I wanted it to end up on. And so I got up the next day and I made myself a doctor's appointment. Went to the doctor, this is the GP talking about, and she was wonderful. Yeah. She prescribed me sertraline. So I'd turned down antidepressants in the past because, again, I believed it was something I should be able to deal with myself, and a lot of stigma around antidepressants and everything as well. Certainly back then I believe that's got better. But in the 5 minutes walk, and I left feeling more positive. I left the GP surgery feeling more positive. In the 5 minutes it took me to walk home, I'd gone, I'm going to get better, like thinking I'm going to get better, I'm never going to cut again, to going, I'm never going to cut again, I should cut. And so that night I cut fairly badly. Okay. Missed something on the Tuesday. On the Wednesday, my parents were out for the day, so I took all my antidepressants. The GP, in her wisdom, had only given me 2 weeks, so it was non-fatal. And so in that respect, that was where things were really coming to a head. A couple of months later, I then got put back onto the sertraline, but doubled the dose, and that seemed to settle quite well for a while. And then a couple of months later, they went away for 2 weeks. First week went pretty well. I was quite productive and everything like that. And then towards the end of that first week, I went on the first of like 2 36-hour benders, just me in the house, cans of lager, and then the second one the following week. After the first one, really shattered my mental health. I felt in a terrible way. What have you done? All that regret and remorse and everything. Just shut myself away for a week, and then 2 days before they went, started drinking again, and really quite severe self-harm on myself, and they came home to that. And I remember they just came in, like said, I said, I've done something stupid again. And from that moment, I never drank again, and that's still the case. And they've just been wonderfully supportive. And they said, look, they got me to the GP, and she said, look, I really think you need to stop drinking while you work on your mental health. And that was, so that went to Mind, me coming through to Barrod. And the last 5 years, because the 22nd of June 2018, that was, so we're just over 5 years ago. It was probably about 5 years ago that I first started coming here, and everything's just been, the life I live now was completely inconceivable that just 5 years ago.
Okay.
Everything I've got, I'm married, that was something I convinced myself that I had nothing to offer anyone, and I was completely unattractive as a proposition for a husband or a partner for anyone. I'm 3 years into a pretty challenging job, and I feel like my head's well above water. I'm coping, which I used to convince myself I was out of my depth with no challenge in a job. I just, kept myself in, like I say, that fear of failure kind of outdoing the will to succeed. That stopped me trying for anything, and it led me to me labouring £40 a day cash in hand on building sites for the best part of a decade. That's kind of gone now, and like I say, what we do here is challenging. It's important work as well, and you can put a lot of pressure on yourself, but I feel that I'm competent, which is something that I never felt in the past. I drive. That was inconceivable. Everything that I've got in my life now, 5 years on, just completely inconceivable. I contribute to a household. That was part of the reason I'm never going to earn enough money to run my own place, because I would have been living alone, because I convinced myself I couldn't be a partner to anyone, but I couldn't earn enough money to run my own place, plus drink and take the amount of cocaine that I needed to take. So everything that all those negative thoughts and those reasons that stop you from pushing on, that's all gone, and I've got everything in place that I just told myself I couldn't have.
So for you then, Steve, in terms of with your alcohol use, was there a moment when it kind of just, you had that thought when you were like, I'm alcohol dependent? Was there a specific moment that springs to mind, or was it just something that kind of happened over time that you gradually kind of accepted, if that's the right word?
I think perhaps accepted is the right word. I think there were times sort of, probably around the early 20s or so, say 20 or 21, where, would wake up some days and the shakes would come on. And I just realised of my friends, I was the only one doing this 7 days a week, Other people could take it or leave it, as it were. They could have a good drink at the weekend, leave it and put it down. So I started to notice differences, perhaps then. And I do remember having a bit of a conversation with my parents, probably around the age of 21 or 22, saying, I think I've got a drink problem. That was coming home on a Friday night after having had a big drink, So I think it was one of those pub talk things more than anything. And I kept myself in denial, sort of outwardly. I think I realised quite a long time before I addressed it that what I was doing wasn't a normal or a healthy relationship with alcohol. Other people didn't do what I did. Like just go to a pub on the way home for an hour and a half where you didn't know anyone, or where you knew you could be alone to drink. So even though I pretty much always drank in the pub most of the time, it wasn't a social aspect for me. That was a place to drink, and if I could drink undisturbed, that seemed to be better for me. And I realised that those weren't normal drinking behaviours from people who were in control of it. Several times, like you curtail it, you do reduce it yourself. I look back now and I think that was perhaps a bit of reassuring everyone, sort of saying, look, I'm all right, look over there now, so that secretly you can start to, escalate it yourself. As far as actually admitting consciously to myself that there was an issue, 6 months after I became abstinent was the time where I would say I actually did. I think I used my mental health as, to me, that was the catalyst. That was the reason. Sort that out and I'd be able to drink responsibly and sort of safely. I know it's so much more intertwined than that now, but I think I used that as an excuse. And the fact most of the time I was working, the amount of excuses you gave yourself, I only drink lager, and then I started drinking Foster's or Carling, so it's only 4%. And then you're like, I'm working, so it can't be that bad. You just give all of these excuses to yourself to continue to do what you do, when it got out of control. It got out of control quickly, to be absolutely honest. When I was in the sixth form, there'd be times where, say, I'd have first period and then nothing till last period, and I'd be in the pub the age of 17, a school kid essentially. Okay. So you look back at that and you think, people weren't doing that. It's it was out of control quickly. But it took me a long time to actually consciously realise it. I think I was able to come up with all of the rational sort of excuses or reasons to continue what I was doing.
And for my own morbid curiosity, you talked about withdrawals earlier. Like, what is that like? What does it feel like? What is the experience like when you actually withdraw from alcohol?
That's the one thing. It's difficult because most of that was more when I was sort of in my early 20s and all that. When I came later and it was the regular sort of dozen pints of Carling or something a night, I didn't feel that too much when I was. But I just remember a couple of times where my body was just kind of vibrating. Okay. Just not able to stop and thinking, what do I do? And really, really quite sort of worried about it and everything. And of course you have just certain things like the stomach upsets and that. But that was what really sticks with me was just the tremors. Oh. And just sitting in the living room with my parents thinking, are they noticing? Sweat's coming out of you and everything like that. It's pretty unpleasant. And everything like that. It's that's what sticks with me. And I remember working in newsagents around about the age of 20, first mobile phone, and I thought the shakes came on, and it was actually, I had my mobile phone in my back pocket and that was on vibrate. Right. But it went straight through me and I just thought, oh my god, these have come on now. But it was just mobile phone that time. But those tremors for me, I can almost feel it now actually. It was just kind of, it's difficult to describe, but kind of like a vibration going throughout my whole body, and you can feel your temperature and everything rising, and there definitely were times where I was withdrawing in bed and similar things, and you just can't get comfortable, but you just roll up in a ball and the sweat's just coming out of you, and you don't see any end in sight. Okay. That's the thing as well. Time sort of ceases to matter. Yeah.
Did you experience, when you actually stopped drinking then for the final time, did you experience withdrawals during that period?
So the last sort of 3 months of drinking, I was binge drinking. So I'd go a couple of weeks, say, without, and then pick up a drink and just drink for 36, 48 hours. And that very last time, like I say, I self-harmed pretty badly as well, lost a lot of blood. And so I wasn't necessarily, I was shaky, my anxiety was through the roof. It was difficult to necessarily distinguish between what was the withdrawal and what was the effects of everything else that had gone on. no doubt I withdrew. I think because over those last 2 times, say like 2 36-hour binges a week apart, I drank 112 cans of lager.
Okay.
And I know I didn't eat in between that as well, so because I just locked myself away in my room. I was in the house on my own, but just locked myself away in the room in between that coming out. So yeah, there's no doubt that there would have been something pretty severe going on, but it was kind of wrapped up in other things. And I mean, it's the whole thing with sudden cessation. I had no idea about that until I came into Barrod.
Okay.
Yeah, no idea about the risks from sudden cessation. Yeah, it's the amount of people that we talk to first time in service who don't know that as well. That's something that you'd think, because family members, partners, and all that, they just want their loved one to stop drinking.
Yeah. So general rule of thumb is that if you are alcohol dependent, you want to stop, then you reduce your use, isn't it? It's similar with Valium use as well. Which, because there are potential fatal consequences to that, isn't there? So, but it's sometimes, I remember like supporting people myself, and I facilitate like the live web chat stuff, and you get kind of concerned individuals for their loved ones, but also people reaching out, wanting support around their own alcohol use, and you sometimes kind of get the idea from their side that it's just a bit of an odd advice that you're giving them in terms of like, don't stop, like, but they're obviously like, but I want to stop. It's like, no, but you can't. Like, I ideally you need to reduce, really. And I think it is really important. If people are alcohol dependent, then that tends to be the general rule of thumb. But obviously they need to discuss it in further detail, don't they? Really, in terms of with like a support worker or maybe even their kind of like GP and stuff with it. But that's something you just didn't know about.
No knowledge of that. And I've come as a worker to see that the alcohol reduction, if someone can, because it's incredibly hard to actually get that control over the alcohol in order to be able to reduce safely. But then when someone does get on that and they're making progress, you can see the momentum. And I think it fundamentally changes their relationship with alcohol as well. So when they're coming to unit counting and slowly reducing, for a lot of people, once they're actually in that, they're getting against, they're starting to see some hope. The alcohol they're taking almost takes on a medicinal property. It's kind of like, this is just something I have to do, rather than this is something that's helping me cope with my emotions, something helping me blot something out, or getting any euphoria from it. And so it fundamentally changes that relationship with alcohol, which I think stands some people in good stead going further into their recovery or like abstinence.
So moving forward then, because I think we can probably spend all day really kind of like discussing those years in terms of where you were kind of drinking and using substances. And obviously, you mentioned that you did use cocaine and kind of MDMA as well, was it? But kind of moving on then in relation to you ultimately stopping using, was it a case of you stopped using everything at once, or did you kind of try to reduce and stop one and then work on the other? Was it, how did it work for you?
So the MDMA was sort of the early 20s, ecstasy, weekend and everything. And that kind of came to an end. Sort of grew out of that with the people that I was using, really. It got to quite epic proportion, sort of like using in the week and everything with the ecstasy and that. But kind of everyone sort of passed on by that. And that's when the cocaine came in. Kind of found out that cocaine was almost like an everyday drug. You could have a few pints, you could have a couple of grams, and you'd be okay for work the next day. And so then the association. And cocaine sort of came and went. The alcohol was pretty constant, but there'd be times, whether it was because, like I say, I flitted between Swansea and Bromley like a couple of times, so you're clearing your phone, your contacts, and always going to find something to drink, not necessarily going to, so I'd have periods without cocaine. And it was probably, I think it was the August bank holiday before I stopped drinking. I'd been using cocaine 3, 4, 5 times a week, always on my own, after drinking. And I did a job, laid some astroturf for friends of my parents from church. And it was something that I was quite worried about, because I'm quite fastidious in that, and I hadn't done it, as it were. But I read up. I did it did a good job of it. They paid me more than I asked for, and so I went thinking quite good. Few pints, spent the rest on cocaine. Woke up next morning thinking, you've done that for nothing now. And I only ever used cocaine once after that. So that was the end of the August. But then it was the following June that I stopped drinking. And that had kind of, my drinking kind of, once I stopped using cocaine, my drinking kind of went up even more. It was 7 days a week, but then the weekends were becoming, take the dog out for a walk. He'd come with me for a couple, I'd take him home. He'd always come to the pub, he'd get biscuits and that, and then I'd take him home and then I'd be out. We actually lost the dog then in the November, and I think that was just where something went in me, and I just really stopped caring. And almost every time I picked up drinking then, it was chasing oblivion. Into the new year, work was a bit hit and miss. And yeah, just saw... It was chasing that oblivion, that kind of despondency, and nothing matters now, I don't care. And that's when the self-harm came in. And like I say, it went from then, for the last couple of months, went from daily drinking to big binges. So wouldn't drink for a couple of weeks, one night, didn't drink for about 2.5 weeks, and then it was a friend's funeral, so decided to have a drink there. Woke up, vomit on the bed and everything, got up, went to work, and then waiting for the next time where you've got 24 hours, 36 hours or so, start drinking and just continue really until no more. And it came to a head that 2 weeks my parents were away, and okay. I'd had the suicide attempt with the antidepressants, kind of picked myself up a bit from that, and then it came to a head there, the self-harm, and it was just quite clear everything had to stop. I still think for quite a while I was looking for an excuse to go back down that road. I think there was unfinished business, because that time when self-harm, the last 2 days before parents came home, really bad self-harm and there was really trying to formulate a successful plan for suicide, but never quite got there to making an attempt. And I think that was still I hadn't got the resolution right. I tried that, it didn't work, let's go again, let's pick ourselves up, try again, and continue on with that. I never kind of made that decision whether or not. And so for a while I think I was still looking for something to happen that I could use as a trigger to go out, start drinking, drink really sort of damagingly and go back down the path of sort of looking to end my life. And then when something did happen, I'd been waiting since, that was the April, for a psychiatric evaluation. And so we were into July here, and I got a letter a couple of days through saying it had been cancelled, and I'd been pinning everything on this. I think this was before actually I'd got in touch with ADAS or Barod or Mind, because that was what I needed. And that was my opportunity. I look back, that was where I made my choice, and I didn't. I watched, the World Cup was on, so watched the game with my dad, didn't go out and have a drink, and the next day I phoned ADAS, set up an assessment. So I think there was a very definite choice on that day, because I had my reason to go out and continue on down that path, and I didn't.
So in terms of with so obviously you started accessing support and stuff. Then were there many big challenges that you kind of experienced and had to ultimately hurdle over in the early stages of recovery, if for the use of a better term?
Yeah, I think that's it. And I think it's kind of easy to look back now and just think it was just walking past pubs, but I would have walked past 1,000 pubs then. And I remember being in Swansea early one day, I can't remember necessarily what it was for, and I walked past Eli Jenkins, and it would have been 9-10 o'clock, and they were open, and my mind went, I didn't know they were open this time, I'll pop in and have a pint. Okay. And I audibly heard myself say to myself, dickhead, so something had started to fit in place by then, but it just was, because certainly with alcohol it is everywhere. And so avoidance, you're just going to isolate yourself. And my parents, they kind of had to let me, because starting to come to mind and Barrod and everything, they had to learn to trust me, sort of coming out on my own, trusting I'll be coming home sober and everything. But yeah, it's where I used to drink, the club and everything, where I go with a dog, I would still go there on a Saturday lunchtime right from the start, because I'd had the conversation with the lady who ran it, and it's like, please don't serve me anything, so I'd have my orange juice and lemonade. So that led to, kept things quite normal. Like I say, parents don't have alcohol in the house, so that, but yeah, I think number one is getting over the anxiety, but also allowing yourself to believe that you deserve to be, or you should be in a place like this, you know, a service, because I could be in smart, and sometimes you're thinking, well, I've not had any of this trauma in my life, I shouldn't be here. The same with the mind sort of things, and those sort of thoughts of just, I'm just an incredibly weak individual. So getting over those sort of feelings as well, and convincing yourself, no, this is where I need to be, which every part of it was where I needed to be. My time, like I say, those 2 years here and at Mind, completely transformative. But yeah, those early days, I just think as well, it was starting to be around people again, because like I say, with those you withdraw from life, and then yeah, you've got people, you don't want to meet anyone you know, because they're going to go, oh, how are things, how are you? And that just becomes the most tricky of conversations and everything. So learning to be out and about, and over a couple of months I kind of structured my week. I was in a good sort of routine and around meetings, like I say, Mind Smart and other stuff going on at Barrod. And so that then started me finding a new thing. I had a conversation fairly early on with my parents, sort of saying, because with me, work was, and any work, just the fact of needing to get up in the morning and do something was so key to my feelings of self-worth, which weren't much at all, that I would always rush back into work, the first offer of work. And I had a conversation with my parents where it was, I think I need to take time out, and they were like, yeah, you need to, this is the time you really need to do things right. And Josh, who is my worker here at Barrod, he suggested voluntary work, so I looked down that sort of route, but managed to structure a week around meetings and various different things. Quite often there'd be a 2-hour bath in the morning, reading in the bath, you know, okay, just filling the days. But yeah, got into a really good routine with that, out with the dog. Well, the dog we didn't get a dog. Yeah, we had Toby by then, sorry. So that would be just things like that, and everything, getting used to living life without that impulse to go in. And because if I had a day off work, it was just, I'd wake up, always been able to sort of wake up at a decent time, and then just restless until I could go and find a drink, you know. Okay. And so it was learning to live without that end goal, because kind of whether I worked or not, it was, how do I get to the pub, almost. Right. Yeah, and so all of a sudden, yeah, you're taking away that end goal.
You mentioned in terms of like alcohol is everywhere, like
yeah.
How's that work for you now? Because obviously so many activities, you know, and I mean activities from, obviously you said you got married, you know, so weddings is, you know, a big one where maybe alcohol consumption is maybe at the forefront of a lot of people's minds because it's a celebratory kind of thing. The football, for example, I know you're a big Charlton fan, you know, so a lot of people obviously go to the pub and watch the football and have a drink, or, you know, but even just going to the supermarket and walking down the street, how do you deal with those scenarios, which I guess to a degree is unavoidable, really, for some situations? How do you get through those, or is it just something you don't really think about now?
Now it is at the point where it's sort of, I don't even think about the fact I don't drink, almost, you know, whereas there is a conscious point of where you're thinking, I'm not going to drink. Like you said, with the football, we used to go very regularly when I was living up in London, home and away, and that was always an excuse for a big drink. So you were drinking all day on a Saturday. I don't go to football regularly now, maybe once a season. but I don't drink. I go with my father who doesn't drink. My wife came to the last one. So it's a different experience as well. I've learned how much I relied on the alcohol in social settings, certainly like bigger groups and everything, so works do's and everything. That's I wouldn't say a trigger, but yeah, the anxiety around those people that I can be fine around in the office and everything, in a social setting, some reason there's something different, and so the anxiety's there. But I know I can just go, and that's more the danger part of me, is when I leave, if I'm going to be on my own, because that's when I could convince myself, I know I'm not going to drink in front of my colleagues or friends or people like that. But then, yeah, if you're on your own, that's where the danger could be. So kind of planning. But it's been a long time now. I get just the odd craving. Like a few weeks ago was just at the local sort of Nisa, and beautiful sunny day, and you see the crates of lager up there, and you go, oh, that'd be nice today. Okay. But that's as far as it goes, Earlier in my recovery, I think you are more consciously aware of that decision not to drink, and so it's, I don't know, because it is, you do, like you say, it is absolutely everywhere. Alcohol, it's on the TV, all the adverts, and win or lose, we're on the booze, isn't it? And so I think there is kind of, I think with driving, isn't it, there's you're consciously competent. So when you first pass your driving test, you're so aware, coming up to the bite and everything.
Thinking about everything.
It is, isn't it? Yeah. When was the last time you checked all your mirrors before pulling off? And I think with recovery that comes, but what you've got to be careful of is not complacency as well. Okay. So I'm quite aware, certainly when it comes to social settings, my anxiety around those, that could be what's triggering to me, and perhaps triggering to me after the event rather than when I'm there. So it's kind of putting in a plan, or just having a contingency almost. But where I am now, it's not a massive issue for me. It's kind of the automatic thing, is not even to say I don't drink, it's just but yeah, because alcohol is everywhere, and it's the TV, and that's the thing. It was like I said that time where I just called myself a dickhead in the middle of the Oxford Street in Swansea. That's how it was. It was actually just really having to draw home to yourself. Yeah. But the more times you make that decision, the more automatic it becomes. Yeah.
One thing I wanted to ask you as well, Steve, in terms of before we wrap up, really is the term alcoholic. And I guess you can kind of add the likes of addict and other kind of terms in there. What's your feelings around such terminology? And the reason why I ask is obviously within the harm reduction community and maybe even further afield, just within the kind of health and social care kind of field, is, they are derogatory terms. They add to the stigma in relation to people who use alcohol, or at least maybe have a problem kind of with alcohol use. And also for me, it's very disempowering, because you're ultimately just using a term to describe a person's life, essentially. What's your feelings around those terminologies, specifically around alcoholic? And would you refer to yourself with such terms? And if you don't, do you use any other terms?
As far as I'm concerned, I don't think alcoholic is a term I'd ever use myself. When perhaps it was a term that could have been attributed to me, I'd like to say I was in denial. If it comes up, I say I'm in recovery. That's kind of how I would, but it's certainly not how I kind of would call myself. I don't introduce myself like say I'm Steve, I'm in recovery. Yeah. The terms, I think, is certainly not for us to attribute to anyone else, and it is, and we get people coming in where family members are constantly calling them alcoholic or junkie or something like that, and that is something we definitely need to. In the fellowships, of course, people use that term for themselves, and some people have very, very long-standing and strong recovery from that. So when someone uses it for themselves in that respect, I don't have so much of an issue with it. I think it's important to certainly with people we work with, that certainly if someone comes in and I'm assessing them and they'd say I'm an alcoholic, I'm not going to challenge them there. That's not the place. But what we want to do is flesh out, okay, that might have been something that potentially you were at one point, but look, you're a father, you're a husband, you know, flesh out like almost like a strength-based approach, you know, what else is there to you, because this is insignificant, this is going to be left alone. I think with like the AA sort of model, for some people it can work as almost a diagnosis. They've got that, so it's something they know they're going to continually have to manage. And so I can understand why it works, but it's certainly not for us to point the finger and say you are this. I would shy away from those terms personally. I'd certainly never refer to anyone as those. And it's difficult because I think ideally, eventually, we don't want anyone to see themselves as a recovering alcoholic or in recovery. We want them to have left it all so far behind. It's other people around there. I think with some people as well, when someone starts getting better in the community that they leave, some people don't like to see that because it holds up a mirror to themselves. And so that's when those terms can come out. Some people are quite comfortable using those terms where they are, but I don't think that's where we want the end point to be. You know, I think it's important, like recovering alcoholic or even in recovery, you know, let's stop even that being part of your identity. You know, I feel I am in recovery, I'll always be in recovery potentially, but I've kind of moved on. I'm a husband now, you know, I'm an active treatment worker. I'm a son, I'm a brother. There's just so much more to me that, being identified. And it was for me definitely those couple of years before I started work. I was in recovery. My life was recovery, you know, that was what everything was tailored to. So it was very pertinent then. Now, it's part of my history, even though, it's something I've got to be mindful of. But ideally, I think the end point is we don't want anything that kind of, if people are comfortable, refers to that. Obviously, if people get value from it and everything and need that reminder, that's their decision. But we certainly as professionals and society wider shouldn't be labelling people or generally, just for something that happened in the past. You know, it's...
Because you're right, you know, at the end of the day, in terms of with yourself, you're Steve, you know, that's who you are first and foremost, you know, and obviously you've got many other things that are going on within kind of your life, you know, in terms of like you said, you know, you are a husband, you are a son, and so on, and obviously you bring a lot to society, you know, and just one example of that is in relation to your job and stuff, and I think that is the case for everybody, and I think it's really odd, I think, in terms of you think about the field in terms of dependency, whether that is drugs, alcohol, gambling, you know, I can't think off the top of my head where there's many other kind of issues where people are just defined by that one behaviour, you know, and I think you ultimately everybody has a part to play within society, you know, and I think most people have, well, I would say pretty much everybody has something positive to bring to society, whatever that is, and I think using such terminology for me is incredibly derogatory because they're a human being, they're a person, you know, and they have a name, and to kind of ban such terms around, I think, is, especially working in the field and working so hard to try and kind of banish such terms, and then you, for example, you know, I read an article in the news literally yesterday, and that, you know, they're using the word addicts and stuff, and it's, you know, for all the work that we do, obviously the mainstream news is going to be in people's minds and ears and eyes, you know, a lot more than, for example, what we do, and it kind of just, it's disheartening, really, I think, from that perspective. But, you know, it for me, I don't think it touches really in terms of how it must feel to those individuals that are labelled with such terminology but don't agree with it as well. So I think, you know, in terms of like reducing stigma, for example, I think that's one of the first places we need to start, in terms of if people are to use such terminology, to call it out, I think, straight away. And I know that's not always easy and not everybody will be able to do that, and I get that, but I think, to try and change the language that we use to ultimately, get people to identify with the next person, regardless of their behaviour, that they are a person, that they are a human being, really. So to wrap things up then, Steve, in terms of, I'm just going to kind of ask you a question. Like, if you, what advice would you give to somebody who maybe is experiencing something similar to what you did previously, who, is struggling in terms of their alcohol use, is struggling with their mental health? What would be that one piece of advice that you would give them?
Is seek help. There is support out there. That's the one thing. I mean, it automatically got me to thinking of me in that position, and it's like no advice would have turned me there. That's the trouble. But yeah, it just is. If you know someone like that, just offer a lending ear. You don't have to be qualified, just to give someone a little bit of time to talk, almost, because that's what I learned to do. Is I learned to talk. Not keeping things bottled up inside. Convinced, okay, they may have been my problems, but people want to hear about them before they get to the point where they're going to hear about something worse. So it is so tough to kind of A, admit you need the help, B, believe that you're worthy of the help sometimes as well. But it's my advice would be just pick up the phone or talk to your doctor, or you can look online and find something, whether it is something in the community or come into service or something like that, because these things can rapidly get to a point where they're incredibly unmanageable. So that would be my advice. Practically, sometimes it's tougher for people to realise that is what they need to do, or what they should do, what they're worthy of.
And it's worth noting in terms of, like, if you wanted to reach out, then you said, like, accessing your GP, calling, your service. Barrowd also does have a live web chat service where you can literally just go onto Barrowd's website at barrowd.com and just start chatting to a trained support worker 7 days a week, confidentially. You don't even have to give your name, and you can kind of get support there and then as well. Steve, thank you very much. I think we can go on for on and on, but I know your time is precious, really, and I just wanted to say thank you very much, and obviously to highlight as well your book, The Day I Chose to Live.
That's right,
as well. And also you wrote an article for Drugs Unwrapped, which is available to view on the Barrowd website under the Drugs Unwrapped kind of banner on there as well. But thank you very much, Steve.
Cheers, Rob.
So we'll be back in about 3 weeks with the next episode. If you'd like to know, or if you'd like to kind of let us know what you'd like to hear about, then get in touch. But until then, take care. Bye bye.